Hi there, Randi Green here, and welcome to another podcast where I am contemplating on some of the challenges that are in front of those of us who are doing the transition. So in the previous two podcasts, in the first one, I kind of laid the foundation so we get to the internal strife and how that has rippled into dividing the holographic metaverse into two main groups. The ones that are doing the progression dynamics as following the progression journey using the exploration and developmental processes of consciousness potentials using the reality fields that were constructed by the ancient ones. And the ones under the 511 pillar or the humanoids that are preferring to use technology to develop and progress. So we're having these two different groups. And since they were the first ones, whoever will be at the end game of the universal cycles will also be the two main groups that will then have to do the final acknowledgement of the different types of progression dynamics before the spillover, as in who will be the founding races of the next universal cycles. So in a way, that is the bigger scheme of what's going on into our reality field. This original division has rippled into the inner domain or the galactic level, as well as the core domain that is, of course, the universal level, and the middle domain that is the systemic or the stellar level, as well as the outer domain that is the terrestrial levels. As I talked about in the first podcast and touched ground with in the second, the journey goes from inside to the outer domain, from the core domain to the outer domains, and there we shed off what is no longer of use, using what we could call the simplified, slower working energies of the outer domain. So that's why it's called density 1. That's where the consciousness, in a way, how am I going to put this? Because we had the timeline event. So that means that the original hollow units were reconfigured into being able to crystallize. And the crystallization process became the core feature of the outer domain. That's where it really crystallized, because that's where we already had what we call a slower progression rate, following what we call the slower vibrational state of the vibrational energies, the vibrational version of the holographic energetic units, and the radiation level that is typically connected to the core and the inner domains, that is the universal and galactic levels, were in the outer domain of what we call less potential state. What does that mean? It means that only portions of it are to be exemplified and used to transform in the outer domain. In a way, we could say the outer domain is where we get the final chance, the last chance to reconfigure in a manner so we can do the U-turn and work back from the starting of a journey as part of the universal cycles in the core domain, then move into the galactic or the inner domain, where we take on form and learn to master the configurations that are to be put into the systemic levels, where we really unfold as civilizations, as societies, and having governance, where we express pillar 1, 7, 2, 8, 3, 3, 9, and 4, 10 into systems that are under governance, and working to master the fifth cycle that goes into the technology, where, as I explained in the previous podcast, we reach the ability to work with technology in a proper manner that will allow us to not fall into the original division. Why is it important to understand the original division of the fifth cycle? Because that's the polarity forces we're up against. That's the polarity we see in the different reality configurations, which are also exemplified, but in a slower pace in the outer domain, in the terrestrial plane. Again, I'll come back to that one. I keep circling around so we get different levels of what it means to be in the terrestrial plane. I could, of course, say we have the mineral level that we have to work with the reconfiguration process of, where we either turn it into dust or elevate it into plasma. That's technically what you can do with the mineral level, where you take the original terrestrial holographic energy units and transform them into their highest potentiality. That's plasma, where they turn from crystallized state into what we call the core flows, or the ability to have the flame code configuration. But as you recall 2 seconds ago, I said that the universal and the inner domain holographic energy units radiation configuration, that's the light language, is slower and less potential in the outer domain. Hence, that journey is more complicated. Whereas if you're in the middle domain and you're under what we call density 2, where you work with quote unquote cycle 4, 5, and 6, which are exemplified into reality fields of dimension 4, 5, and 6, then you understand that you're working with what we say, first and foremost, the vibrational field needs to be upgraded to hold the original progression dynamics following the principles and the rules of engagement. That's typically the fourth cycle. So you could say the principles are the guidelines to transform the hollow units into their highest purity rate, which is plasma cycles that are similar to the core domain configuration. So that's why we have got an inner earth as well, even though, as far as I know, the original inner earth civilizations that were part of the planetary hierarchy that are part of both the two groups of the technocratic or the 511 and the 612 pillar, they decided to take off in 2017 due to we know what happened between 2018 and 2022. Seeing that one coming and taking off will return later on, but in a different version, because they have also elevated for the time being and will come back with a new configuration that is more suitable for the transition process that we are going in. So we have a takeoff from the different groups that are here from the outer domain, the middle domain, and the core domain, and the different civilizations that have been here over the course of human history, and they're coming back in a newer version due to the changes that we are undergoing. It's only technically the outer surface humans, which means you and me and everybody on this planet, that are struggling with what we could say the most dense configuration. And here when we talk dense, then we talk the mineral, proton, electron, neutron level that is connected to the quantum fields. And that's our physical form. And since that one is coded into our emotional field, that is connected to our vibrational field, and by that is connected to quote unquote karma, that is connected to whatever we have been doing on the different timelines, then it goes without saying that unless we clear the timeline connection points, the access points into vibrational field, through the original holographic energetic architecture, well, it will be difficult to upgrade our mineral level. Which is why there has been different types of programs that have either focused on shedding off the body and only transfer out of this system using the middle domain configuration that is in the light body, and others are going even further than that, just saying as an orb going with the original holographic radiation configuration or code systems that can then, where you use the vibrational field to create a light orb, where you then take out what's left of the original consciousness units. That's technically using the gateways through the library. So I talk about that in transition sciences as well. So we are having these different levels of how to get out. It depends on the physical level. I'm not really working for the transition of the physical form. I don't need to take this form with me anywhere. I see it as an incomplete architecture. So if you say, well, what choice would you go? Well, for me, walking through the gate system via my light body would only be if I found it prudent and necessary for me to take on an organic vessel in this reality field, in the outer domain, after the transition sometime in the future. If I would see that to be of a focus or a purpose and a function that I had to do. Otherwise, I would say, well, I cleaned out my own timelines, I cleaned out my vibrational field, I detached the organic form, cleansed as much as I could of the organic crystallized mineral level of the density 1 configuration to its highest purity rate, turning it into flame codes, and by that has reconfigured my vibrational field, transforming whatever timelines I had there, evaporated as much as possible, gathered whatever was left of original functional consciousness units from these timelines, transforming them, that is, getting rid of the karma or the distortion that's connected to them, creating the highest progression rate in my vibrational field, that is the highest standards. And with that would be able to surmise it all up into a light orb where I would use the reconfigured, transformed holographic energetic units of the density 2 configuration, undoing all crystallization and effects of the timeline event, I would then create a light orb. I would lift up using the plasma codes to do so, and the transform vibrational energies into a high vibrational state that goes with the core domain. I would then, or the inner domain for that matter, I would lift it up so it could carry the universal and inner domain light code sequences of the radiation field from where I would use the library to get out of here, creating myself in a new version via the library crystal disk and the library information that is there of my original holographic energetic architecture that I entered into the solar system with. And with that one, deleting everything that is part of this system, cleaning every single unit of my consciousness and whatever I've been tied to, or whatever program in this reality field, cleaning it out completely, and then leaving this system in the outer domains and do the return from the library and into the what we call the not necessarily inner earth. That's one way to get out. But since it's going to be recalibrated with some new core domain races, I'm not so sure that's the path I'm going to take. And they will be linked up to the Andromedan system, as we know, which is both for good and for ill, because they are not done with their divided cycles as well. So we have the polarity going on there too. So either way, it's kind of, are we going to continue to do the what we could call the completion cycles of the original division, where we eventually unify these two sections that were of the 511 pillar and the 612 pillar, or the humanoids and the true human races? Or will I say, well, I paid my dues and I'm now going back to the holographic metaverse? And that's through the library in the 6th dimension. Whereas if I continue, then I just have to complete the 5th cycle and then step into what we call the timelines that are focused on, it's called the end battle between the humanoids and the true humans. That will not go in wars as we know of it. It will be what we could call a challenge of discernment, that is the discernment between cold light and true light. So in that manner, understanding what is the original core and inner domain radiation configuration, and in what type of vibrational hollow units, for the purpose of either the highest purity, the highest standards, and the highest progression rate, or for the evolutionary processes as the humanoids see as their end goal. So with that, it is this, we could say, a kind of a weird competition between the ones that still stick to the previous universal cycles and the use of technology, and the races of this universal cycle that use the high order sciences to progress through consciousness potentials. Either way, I have not made up my mind of that one yet. There will be the ones that choose to go into the timelines of the future of the universal cycles. We're here talking about the universal cycle timelines that were affected by the timeline event. It mostly hit in the middle domains, and that's where we have got the polarity. The polarity is in the middle domain. That's the left or the right hand path, as has been said. So with that, we understand that as long as we are in the outer domain and we are on the terrestrial level, we not only have the purity of the mineral that is the effect of the timeline event where the original hollow units began to crystallize. Not only was it what we call a more dense reality that slowed down what we call the distortion processes, so we could upgrade and unify and clear out whatever was no longer of use of timelines in the terrestrial plane or the outer domains. And then we could do the U-turn into the middle domain, catch up with what we call the 4th dimension, the 4th cycle properties, and then begin to develop and reconnect to our inner domain and core domain configuration, that is the light codes of these two systems that goes with the radiation field. So the outer domain of the terrestrial plane technically has a very low type of inner and core domain configuration potentiality, consciousness potentials. The highest level in the outer domain is the 5th cycle. The 5th cycle, the 4th cycle, and the 5th cycle overlap into the middle domain because that's how we slide or spill over into the inner domains once we shed off this physical form. In the old days, there were gates that could allow us to walk into inner earth if we had recalibrated ourselves in the correct manner. But since inner Earth of the older types of civilizations took off in 2017, well, that these gate systems were shut down as well and are now laid dormant. So they are no longer there to uphold the energy configuration of the reseeding of the fourth cycle races after the fall of Atlantis. So in that manner, we also understand that many of the old dynamics that we worked from the outer domain to get into the middle domain via inner Earth are no longer suitable. These gates are no longer operational. And at the same time, we had the whole issue between 2018 and 2022 that has also changed not only the radiation levels of many people with what we call the mind field connect to the frequency fence, and the now rolled out new type of quantum computers, AI, etc., what have you, then that's kind of a double up, etc., and what have you. But going into that understanding, and I know I'm blasting through here, but that's because I've been talking about so many different variations in all of my previous podcasts. Here I'm just doing a sum up so you quickly can get up to speed with what is your focus point here. Once you understand how your three lower fields are part of a lower order configuration that has been re-engineered to match the current enclosure matrix configuration of frequency, spectrum, units that we call atoms, and that is unnatural to who and what you are, and in all ways and forms create more distortion by clinging on to that configuration. And learning that the transition into the original density 1 is fueled by both the core domain races that have linked up to the core domain radiation fields and are changing the code systems there, which will then eventually make it more difficult for the middle domain races to enter into what we could call the settings of the true humans, because it is, as we said, it is a pushing back and forth between the 511 pillar and the 612 pillar races, or the humanoids and the true humans, as in what is the end game going to be, and on what level, and in what version, and on what timelines. And then, of course, we have within the 511 pillar, we have the lower types of groups that are in the outer domain, the middle domain, and the inner domains that are very solidified in their connection to the previous universal cycles and wants to create kingdoms within the 511 pillar that are oriented towards the previous universal cycle. So they have internal battles there as well within the different groups. So within the polarity forces of between the humanoids and the true humans on the core domain level, and in the inner domain level being divided into different types of organic vessels that either runs on technologies or runs on consciousness, divided into the middle domains where it becomes into what we call segregation of civilizations and different reality fields into different configurations that are dissimilar and in many ways are in opposition towards each other. It also goes into a polarity of the radiation field dynamics that are connected to the fifth cycle. It goes into the opposition and segregation of one tribe against another in the fourth cycle, or the fourth dimension, if you like, and becomes territorial. Then in the outer domain, we have the mess of it all, as in mentally having difficulties in the polarization between right and wrong and what have you. And we have the emotional opposition in what am I to take care of, what I'm not to take care of, how am I to assist, how am I not to assist, am I there to others and I'm not there for others, and what's the right angle, and confusion. And at the same time, all of that ripples into the electron and proton levels of your physicality, which is now being imbued with the new quantum fields through the neutron of your cellular structure, the atomic level of your cellular structure, which then adds in what we call a sped up type of magnetic field on the quantum level reconfiguration of humanity from within to avoid the higher radiation code systems that are now coming from the core domains that has now been shifted for now into the parallel races of the Andromedan galaxy. But bear in mind, they're still in their struggle as well. So it might be that for now, but it's not the same. It's going to be like that forever. So we are in this constant pushing back and forth with the different factions and their infights and their disputes within their own pillars and their own dimensional progression programs or evolutionary programs. Pillars in different cities and societies and evolutionary cycles are what we could say where we work through the different dimensions of the different domains. So the outer domain is pillar 1-7, the middle domain is 2-8, the inner domain is pillar 3-9, and the core domain are pillar 4-10. And you will say, well, what about pillar 5-11 and pillar 6-12? Well, they are kind of the core domain, but the top notch of where we all will, that's the source level, if you like. That's where we began and that's where we will end up, but hopefully in a complete, full-blown, complex configuration that is then stronger and overriding the original configuration. Although some of the 5-11 pillar races, they wanted to be the original configuration. So there's another foundation for disputes and different opinions of what is the correct progression rate and what is to be sought for. In all of that mess, then you can say, this is just so much confusion. Why do I bring it up? Well, first and foremost, it is because the final stand out between the two main groups of the humanoids and the two humans that will make the transition of the universal cycles. We will look at each other from the different types of progression journeys that we have taken. And then it will be a journey of discernment, which one will be the one that will spill over with whatever type of life force that we have engineered and created. Unfortunately, the humanoids, they have created life force that is based upon technology as well as exploitation of other civilizations. So in a way, they are in this battle themselves, or this challenge themselves of transforming the terrestrial planes, trying to make it all humanoid so they won't collect what we call distortion energies while they're still doing their what they call regenesis programs. And in the middle domain, they are trying to reconfigure themselves through different types of crystalline methods that will upgrade their type of third cycle energies into what we call plasma energies, but used in quantum field energies and technologies and AI to do so. And at the same time, when they reach the galactic level, they are up against the previous history of their civilizations that collapsed many of the original connection points to the original holographic network that spawns out from what we call the galactic level. That's part of the galactic cores. So in that one, if we could call the cosmic web, if you like, they've destroyed their own cosmic web. That should allow them to travel back into the core domains, because you can only go to the core domain via the galactic cores. So we have the core of the planet, we have the core of the sun, we have the core of the galaxies, and we have the core of the core domain that goes to the new universal cycle. So in that we understand that each system has its outer configuration surface. It has its middle configurations that are kind of what we call the layers before inner Earth, and then we have the inner Earth itself that is part of both the highest level, the middle domain, going into what we call the inner domains. The middle domains take off to different gate systems to the systemic levels of the sun. You can also travel through the sun because that's a gate too, because it's a systemic representation of a core domain of the systemic network of the different suns or the soul gates that are there, the solar gates that are there as well. So that's another configuration. So if you master the fourth and the fifth cycle of the outer domain, you can technically use the gate systems to walk via the sun into the systemic levels of reality. But you have to have upgraded your vibrational field and radiation field to match the configuration of the solar gates. So that's another issue we're having, since these solar gates were overridden and changed by the regressor races that came here from the humanoids and reconfigured into matching their gate system so they could access our reality field via the sun using crafts and technologies to do so. A reconfiguration. So you see, many of the original gate systems that we could use to walk between the realities have been changed into being technologically overseen using stargates that are connected to cubes or crafts. So there they have changed it into a technology reconfigured type of gate system instead of being the original one that were depending on consciousness potentials. So we are also, that's also part of it. So you hereby begin to understand that the reason why you do inner work is because that opens up either the gates on the physical level that you can kind of walk through on the outer domain. Many of these gates have unfortunately been overridden as the holographic network of density 1 fell and were depleted and destroyed in some of the original first wars that took part in our quadrant as the technocratic races began to take over and colonize our quadrant. With that, they used a lot of toroidal technology, which also blasted Maldak and other planets that were in our solar system at the time, using the original cosmic web to do so, the terrestrial gate system, taking them over, overriding them, and infusing them with third cycle energies that allowed for the technology link up of the previous universal cycle. So in many ways, many of this original holographic network, which is now changed to the quantum field, has been changed to be able to link up to technology. In that way, for most of us that are choosing the progression path of the original true human races, a no-go. The ones that choose to do it via technology and get different types of TGs inserted, they will be able to use the gate systems using technology to do so. But for that, they have to align with specific factions, and with that align to different types of civilizations that are either walking through these gates using TGs, that is a kind of let's call it a sack of type of re-engineered types of genetics that allows the walkthrough, but is connected to a cube, a personalized cube that will be recognized by the technologically driven gate system or via crafts. So that's the humanoids that are relying on that solution. They are being now recalibrated to hold that type of technology, and that is kind of consciousness. Genetic type of technology we're here talking about. Then there are the other groups that are doing it the good old way, using the progression dynamics. As me, I don't see myself do a physical walkout. I didn't see any purpose of it either, because this is just another form amongst many. And I have had many different organic vessels, and I'm not attached to my organic vessel. I maintain it. I keep it healthy. I keep it in a highest vibrational state as possible. I'm very kind and caring about it. It's like a child. I'm nurturing it. I'm protecting it. I'm defending it. I'm taking the best care I can of my physical vessel, because this is the reason why I can exist here. But it's not an equipment that is suitable for the middle domain. It's not an equipment that's suitable for the middle domain. It can no longer hold the fourth dimensional energies that are part of inner earth. So in that manner, it is no longer capable of walking through the gate systems into inner earth. And it's no longer capable of doing the transfer via the original holographic network, density 1 gate systems, because that has been taken over and overridden by different forms of cube, fifth dimensional technologies that are connected to the 3-5 configuration. That is the biological quantum field with the artificial fifth dimension of the races that belong to the fallen groups that were reseeded after the fall of Atlantis. So in that manner, that's the discernment that has to be done. And as I understand that discernment, because I understand the dynamics of a reality field and the original strife and what's going on here, it's easier for me to make the decision in what I'm seeing in the world. I can say that's the 511 pillar, and they're the humanoid agenda, and this is the true human agenda. And I polarize myself always to go into the true human agenda. So what does that mean for me? That means transformational work. That means inner work. That means a lot of clearing work. There is a lot of clearing work to be done to choose the progression path. It's probably the most difficult of all. It's been called the narrow path. Hence, many choose to what we could say, turn the other cheek to the real world as it is around us and focus on the inner world. And in that way, the inner worlds or the inner work is then to try and reconfigure to either be able to, when we shed off this body, to use the gate systems of the middle domain, using either inner earth or using some of the solar gates, where we will then be able to walk either in our light bodies, or we will be able to, due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity, be pulled to the gate systems from where we will naturally be allowed through the original solar gates as part of the true human civilizations, because we have the configuration to do so. So that would be one version of what should we call it, strategy in the outer domain in the work that we are to do once we reach the density 1 configuration processes. The other one will be to go for the plasma rays and the plasma core configuration that aligns with the radiation field, where we transform our biology completely so that once we shed off this form, it just decomposes and turns into dust, and there's nothing to be reborn and recalibrated or recircled. We recalibrate our vibrational field completely to match what we call the core and inner domain configuration, where the radiation field is capable, that's the template sciences, that is capable of reconnecting to our upgraded holographic energetic structure that is now so transformed and has such a high vibrability rate that it becomes literally the golden cup or the golden light body that vibrates in what we would call an advanced fourth and fifth dimensional configuration that allows for the sixth dimensional library code systems to connect to it, and by that unfold the original holographic energetic structure and consciousness potentials of the inner and core domain. And that's part of the library. So we technically have to go through the libraries to get out. So that's also why the libraries that are around our planet are also part of the big cabal there is between the different groups that are here trying to get access to these libraries. So those of you who are working for that one, you will be in a different type of defense modality to protect your reality field configuration that aligns you with the levels of the library, and that's the upper levels of your template. Whereas most will focus on the middle level of your template holographic energetic structure, focusing on the heart field, the vibrational field, to create the cup of light, the golden cup that will hold what we could say is the higher order types of consciousness potentials that are possible to get through the inner earth or the solar gates. If you choose that one, then what's left of the upper level of the template will, when you leave the system and have reconfigured yourself to the fullest degree you can on that level, using the golden cup as a mean to get out, that is using the light body to get out, to transfer between this system and other systemic systems using either the solar gates or the inner earth gates, well, then the library itself will decompose and collapse, and whatever you got stored there will then no longer have a connection point inside the vibrational field that is the heart, and by that understand that whatever it used to be connected to is no longer in circulation, and by that it will discard and discharge whatever it has got stored there and will cease to exist, and by that you're also disconnected from the outer domain and you have done the turnaround the way that you're supposed to. With that, we also begin to understand there are also dynamics of the constructions of the ancient ones that we can play with and understand. And I'm talking about that in the transition sciences as well as the template science course material. For me as a true human, and using the progression dynamics of consciousness and non-exploitation for the highest good of the many, for me, everything I do is a transformational process every day. And it's a difficult path to take due to not only the cleansing of old timelines, past history, distortion, karma, physical karma, emotional karma, mental karma, distortion energies, physical, mental, emotional, all levels, and whatever I am and have been and will become. The challenge is here also to be in the constant, what we could call bombardment of different forms of outer, middle, and inner domain energies from the different groups that are here that are trying to uphold their jurisdictional rights and prerogatives of why they feel they're still entitled to do the regenesis programs in the middle domain, and are trying to override what we call the core and inner domain configurations, getting ready for the last cycle or the end game, because that will be on the galactic and the inner domain level of getting ready to do who will enter into the core domain and do the spillover, as well as the enslavement and colonization of the outer domains, the terrestrial planes, turning that in under what we call the how to preserve the viability rate, because most of the outer domain civilizations as well as their worlds are demolished and have succumbed to the reconfiguration of the holographic network into being connected to the cube technologies, which overrides and begins to create hive mind structures and enhanced human, augmented human reality fields. So that's the process that we are in. So we now begin to understand, okay, this is the challenges that we are in, not only the outer domain challenges that goes within the 5 configurations of the distorted version of the original work we're supposed to be here, the quote unquote spiritual work or the progression sciences for elevation and doing the return or the turnaround, the U-turn, where we get shed off what's no longer of use so we can recalibrate ourselves to do the battle or the journey for the undoing of the internal strife. I will not call it a battle, but for some it seems like that. And at the same time, we also have the ones that are trying to preserve and keep us here so we will fuel their regenesis programs that are going on a systemic level and onward and so forth. So with that summation of that one, we are now going into what can you do as an individual, what can you do as you, and what would be your most important focus in your inner work. Again, the outer work is also necessary. You kind of need to master the outer reality to be able to really do the inner work. And that's where the whole Changemaker project came in, which I did last year or the year before that, where I focused on, okay, as change makers, having your own small business or everyday life, what does that mean? And it ties into the transition sciences as well. How you can recalibrate your outer environment to match your inner work environment. So you're not just, you can of course choose to go into an ashram or go into a monastery or seclude yourself from the world and focus on your inner work entirely to upgrade your vibrational field. That's typically the ones that want to do either inner earth or the solar gates. They choose to do so. If you are to choose to go through the what we could call the inner domain gate systems that are part of the 7th, 8th, and 9th dimension that are connected to the radiation field, then you have to have the sciences with you. And that's where those of us who are bridging to the 5th cycle, the ones that leave via the 4th cycle through the solar gates of the inner earth, the ones that choose to work through the 5th cycle and use the library or use what we call the higher levels, systemic levels, goes through the stellar gates, that's a whole other calibration. They need the sciences. And that's the 3-5 configuration. But those who do not have the heart field with them or the 4th cycle, they will typically end up in the artificial 5th or under the humanoid races. Those who have the heart field recalibrated with them, they then have the option of actually continue into what we call the end game of the humanoid and the true human races. So there's also what we call prohibiting technologies, preventing people from taking that path, since the humanoids are trying to occupy what we could say all of the eyes of the needle that will lead to the true humans to be able to actually have what we could call a polarity or the original stance in the end cycle, the complete end cycle of a universal structure. So again, it's also up to you to figure out, are you in just the personal one where you are just figuring out whether or not you're just doing this for yourself in a continuation of your lineage and what you are here to offer and what your original purpose and function was as part of the original 10 lineages that completely recalibrated, or you're part of the 511 humanoids that are then trying to occupy all of the gate systems so that they will have literally cut off all pathways to the inner domain so that they will be the soul group that will leave through quote unquote source, and by that as crystalline races reconfigured via technology would be the ones that spill over, shutting the doors for all the true humans? Or are you part of the original true humans that will then either say, well, I've done my duty, I go through the solar gates using the original consciousness potentials, created my light body, which is a huge accomplishment as things are now, so that's a thumbs up, and you choose to do that? Or do you choose to go as the orb through the library and get out of here, which is also a huge accomplishment, a completion of all of your cycles, which will then be as the first of many, which will technically be the true path of the savior of Christ consciousness, if you like. You do the full configuration and you leave out there. And that's for some of the humanoid races that wants to do that as well, because they're done with their own 5-pillar technologically infused humanoid agenda evolving through technology. Some of them, they decide, yeah, I'm kind of done with that, I want to do something else. So we have a lot of things that each and one of you need to feel in. What is the path for you? Is it through the heart, or is it through the mind, or is it through the heart and mind, or is it just through what we could say on the physical level? What level are you working on in this lifetime? And these are some of the understandings that will come in the inner work, where it's not just about, I want to ascend. It's about what type of ascension, on what level of ascension, through which gates are you elevating? What's the purpose of your ascension? What is it that you want to achieve with your inner work? What is it that you want to achieve with the self-healing? Is it out of fear? Is it out of self-preservation? Which group do you belong to? You will typically get that with the teachers that you are drawn to, that will tell you a little bit of what kind of gate system you want to leave through, what kind of configuration you want to have as everything resets. Because what does it mean that we reset into a density 1 configuration? Well, it means that we have come to the end cycle of the timeline event. Most of these energies have withdrawn back to the singularity event, and by that are no longer present. So what has the humanoid races that wants to keep that type of configuration done? Well, they have built a new type of frequency fence. They have built a new type of what we call artificially induced frequency levels that are connected to the new quantum fields, coming up with new technologies that are all run by AI, so that they preserve the original third cycle energies that are possible inside this reality field. And then we of course have the heavy group that are part of what we call the dark configuration, the dark light configuration, that also wants to keep the third cycle energies here and the old third cycle gates open via the dark galactic core. So we are having that group playing out their agenda here as well. That group is technically going through the Orion system. So that's the stellar gate they are using, and that's the dark gate. So with that, we also understand there are different groups, there are different stellar gates, there are different solar gates, there are different planetary gates, there are different inner earth gates, there are gates through the library, and all of these different discernments that needs to be done. And that's why when we talk about the end cycle of those of us who choose to stick around and complete the universal cycles and not just jump ship, so to speak, but everything is allowed. There's not one solution that's better than other, because if the whole universal structure will collapse into the universal matrix of the LPU races, then it's better that the true human potentialities and original genetics literally jump ship and do the transition back to the holographic metaverse and begin all over there where they actually belong to begin with. Some of us that chose to get part of the LPU was to assist for the highest good of the many, the ones that chose to do the technological developmental processes as I described in the Source of Humanity. And if we have cleaned out our mess and all of our involvement in these projects, as I have, then we will have done our duty as well. We have done everything that's human possible, true human possible, in all levels of who and what we are, assisted in all ways and forms. And if we can look at that and say we've done everything, but they still choose to go in another way, in another form, and creating their own worlds as they so choose, then the laws of segregation will play in. And these laws are not what we call value system segregation due to what we call the negative form or the distorted version of segregation. This is what we could say a matter of vibration. It's a matter of heart quality. It's a matter of compassion and understanding that sometimes there are groups within this universe that choose to go on a different path where they don't align with vibrational connectedness of the heart field and the connectedness of the highest good of the many, but choose to do something else. And if that's the case, then that's the peaceful solution to the end cycles, where they will then continue in the universal structures they have created until they're ready to either reconnect to the original universal cycles or completely segregate, and by that create an alternate universal structure altogether. That is a potentiality as well. That will buy us some time for some future civilizations, but at some point things will either have to go into evaporation or reunite with its original source. And so you can say, what is the true source of everything? The holographic metaverse, where we originally sprung from. So it's not a divine feature. It is a world that we once belonged to. It's domains we once belonged to. It is configurations and consciousness potentials that we once had. And this is part of all of us as individuals. This is the true source. You return to the true source that is yourself and who you were to begin with when you spilled over into this universal structure. You reunite with your original structure, the original holographic energetic units that you had when you spilled over, now hopefully returning like the lost son or the lost daughter, returning to the original version that you had that are stored as a configuration, merge with that one, and then take everything you have learned and upgrade everything you were and transforming into the highest potentiality of consciousness that is possible within your universal structure. In a way, reconnecting and reuniting with everything you learned from the previous cycle, with what you've learned from these cycles, and then turn it into something else that will be of use for the next universal cycles. So this is the biggest for me. This is why we do the inner work. That's why we do the reconfiguration. That's why we are observant of the transition of the sun, because that matters in terms of the solar gates. Will they open, the original ones, or will they remain shut due to the overriding of the technology? Will the sun collapse and reset to default, and then the original architecture of the ancient ones? And if so be, then what influence would that have on my vibrational field? And if that happens, then all the ones that are belonging to the technocratic walls, they will no longer have a footing in our solar system. So that's what they're trying to avoid, hence the crisscrossing on the sky and all the reconfiguration. And those of us who have the true human race and the original solar system civilizations that worked as part of assisting what we call the flawed genetic lineages in the original restoration program, and then undoing the effects of the timeline event, so that all worlds can be reunited as part of the original universal cycles and what we decided to begin with before we split up. Well, we have a different agenda, quote unquote. We work in different manners, and either saying, at least I have done all the things that's human possible, and I can then take off because I know I've done everything that was in my power to do with whatever I got left, or we will continue the journey for the final stand, where we will then look at what we were, connecting to that, recalibrating, upgrading it. The humanoids will do the same, and then we will look between the 511 pillar and the 612 pillar, and then we will do the final either unification and spill over, or the final division that will then lead into a new type of divided universal structures that will then run parallelly. So that's part of the contemplation work that needs to be done. So when we talk in terms of the inner work, that's the kind of the understanding that needs to be taken, that where are we, what do we have of potentiality, how high is our viability rate, that's the physical connectedness to the planetary network, how high standards do we have, that's the connectedness to either inner earth or the solar gates, how high leveled is our radiation field that's connected to either the inner domain and the core domains and the final stand. What capacities do we have? What is possible, and what should we aim for? How far do we want to go? What does our heart tell us is our type of energy work? What type of inner work? What type of clearing work? That in many ways will determine what type of information you will get from your own holographic energetic architecture. It will tell you you're only here to undo the effects of the timeline event. Then it's via inner earth or via the solar gates. You are here to prepare for the final universal stand. Then it's the radiation field and the core plasma flows you're aiming for, and the flame layers and the understanding of how to build in reality fields and reconfigure reality fields to the original configuration of the ancient ones, and onward and so forth. So that's your function and your purpose. That is your mission statement that will clarify for you what your inner work and clearing work and self-upgrading work, ascension work should actually be about. So with that one put out there, then we can look into how does that actually apply to our everyday life as part of the base program. Thank you.